The ancient scribes of Anubis whispered of texts that would emerge in the final epochs, bearing knowledge that mortals were not yet prepared to comprehend. In the shadowed chambers beneath the pyramids, where the god of judgment weighed souls against the feather of truth, there existed prophecies of a revelation that would arrive when humanity stood at the crossroads between enlightenment and destruction. This revelation would come not through the traditional channels of divine communication, but through the mysterious corridors of mortal consciousness, channeled by beings whose very existence challenged the boundaries between the celestial and terrestrial realms. The seeker who encounters the Urantia papers finds themselves confronting a paradox that would have been familiar to the ancient Egyptian initiates. Here lies a text that claims to contain the ultimate answers to existence itself, yet emerges from circumstances so enigmatic that they defy conventional understanding. Like the sacred texts hidden within the tomb of Thutmose III, the Urantia Book arrived through channels that blur the line between divine revelation and human creation, challenging those who would seek truth to look beyond the surface of its origins. In the early decades of the 20th century, when the world trembled on the precipice of unprecedented change, a peculiar phenomenon began to manifest in the city of Chicago. A man whose identity remains shrouded in protective secrecy would enter states of consciousness that defied medical explanation. During these episodes, entities claiming to be celestial beings would speak through him, delivering teachings that spanned the cosmos itself. The assembled group of physicians, psychiatrists, and intellectuals who witnessed these sessions found themselves confronting something that challenged every assumption they held about the nature of reality and consciousness. The entity known as the Divine Counselor spoke first, describing the nature of the Universal Father with a precision that seemed to transcend human theological understanding. This being claimed to originate from paradise itself, the central universe around which all creation revolves. The words that flowed through the sleeping subject carried an authority that resonated with ancient wisdom traditions, yet presented concepts that seemed to anticipate scientific discoveries that would not be made for decades to come. As the sessions continued over the course of many years, a vast cosmology began to emerge. The celestial beings described a universe of staggering complexity and beauty, populated by billions of inhabited worlds, each following its own evolutionary path toward spiritual perfection. They spoke of administrative hierarchies that governed entire galaxies of spiritual circuits that connected all conscious beings to the divine source, and of evolutionary plans that spanned millions of years. The scope of this revelation dwarfed even the most ambitious mythological systems of ancient civilizations. The beings identified themselves with names that carried both familiarity and strangeness: Melchizedeks, archangels, life carriers, and thought adjusters. Each category of celestial personality was described with meticulous detail, their functions and relationships mapped out with the precision of a cosmic organizational chart. Yet beneath this systematic presentation lay currents of profound spiritual insight that spoke to the deepest longings of the human soul. Central to their teaching was the concept that every human being carries within their mind a fragment of the universal Father himself. This thought adjuster, as they termed it, was not merely a metaphorical presence, but an actual piece of divine consciousness that guides and nurtures the developing soul. The implications of this teaching were staggering if true. It meant that every person, regardless of their circumstances or beliefs, carried within them a direct connection to the source of all existence. The celestial teachers spoke of Earth, which they called Urantia, as a world that had suffered a unique tragedy in cosmic history. They described a rebellion that had occurred hundreds of thousands of years ago, led by a being named Lucifer, who had challenged the very foundations of divine authority. This rebellion had affected 37 worlds in the local system, including Earth, cutting them off from the normal spiritual circuits that connected inhabited planets to the broader universe. According to these teachings, Earth's isolation explained much of the confusion and conflict that had characterized human history. Without the normal guidance that other worlds received, humanity had been forced to develop its spiritual understanding through trial and error, often falling into patterns of thought and behavior that perpetuated suffering and division. The planet had become a testing ground where souls could develop exceptional strength through adversity, but at a tremendous cost in terms of human anguish and social dysfunction. The beings described a series of divine interventions designed to help Earth overcome its spiritual handicaps. They spoke of epochal revelations that had been given to humanity at crucial junctures in its development. The teachings of the planetary prince, the mission of Adam and Eve, the emergency mission of Machiventa Melchizedek, and most significantly, the bestowal of Michael of Nebadon, whom humans knew as Jesus of Nazareth. This last revelation formed the centerpiece of the Urantia teachings. According to the celestial beings, Jesus was not simply a human teacher or even a divine messenger, but the actual creator of the local universe in which Earth resided. His incarnation as a human being was described as the culmination of a series of bestowals through which he had experienced life as various orders of created beings. His time on Earth was portrayed not merely as a mission of salvation, but as the completion of his own experiential understanding of the creatures he had brought into existence. The detailed account of Jesus' life that emerged from these sessions was unlike anything found in traditional Christian sources. The celestial beings described his childhood, his travels during the so-called lost years, his family relationships, and his inner spiritual development with an intimacy that suggested direct observation. They portrayed him as fully human in his experience, while simultaneously maintaining his divine nature and cosmic responsibilities. Yet even as these revelations unfolded, questions arose that would persist long after the final session had concluded. The sleeping subject through whom these teachings came remained anonymous, protected by a small group of individuals who had committed themselves to preserving and eventually publishing the material. The circumstances of the revelations themselves were never fully explained, leaving room for both wonder and skepticism about their ultimate source. The ancient wisdom keepers of Egypt understood that truth often comes disguised in forms that challenge conventional thinking. The priests of Anubis knew that the most profound revelations frequently arrive through channels that test the discernment of those who would receive them. The seeker must learn to distinguish between the vessel and the content, between the method of delivery and the substance of the message itself. As the Urantia papers began to take their final form, those who had witnessed their emergence faced a profound responsibility. They held in their hands what claimed to be the fifth epochal revelation to humanity, a teaching that purported to answer the fundamental questions that had puzzled philosophers and theologians for millennia. Yet the very circumstances of its arrival ensured that it would never be accepted without controversy and debate. The text that eventually emerged as the Urantia Book contained nearly 2,000 pages of material organized into 4 major sections. The first dealt with the nature of deity and the central universe, presenting a theological framework of unprecedented complexity and sophistication. The second described the local universe and its administration, mapping out the spiritual hierarchy that governed Earth's cosmic neighborhood. The third provided a detailed history of Earth itself, from its formation through the development of human civilization. The fourth presented the complete life and teachings of Jesus, told with a level of detail that far exceeded the biblical accounts. Each section built upon the others, creating a unified vision of reality that attempted to reconcile science, philosophy, and religion into a single coherent worldview. The beings who claimed authorship of these papers demonstrated knowledge that seemed to transcend the limitations of early 20th century understanding, making statements about cosmic evolution, planetary development, and spiritual reality that would only be validated by later scientific discoveries. Yet for all its claims to divine authority, the Urantia Book arrived in the world without the traditional markers of revealed religion. There were no miracles to authenticate its message, no prophetic fulfillments to validate its claims, no institutional authority to enforce its teachings. It stood or fell on the strength of its content alone, challenging readers to evaluate its truth through their own spiritual discernment and rational analysis. The guardians of this revelation understood that its very nature would ensure a mixed reception. Those who approached it with rigid preconceptions about how divine truth should be communicated would likely reject it out of hand. Those who sought easy answers or simple formulas would find themselves frustrated by its complexity and nuance. Only those prepared to engage with its teachings as serious students, willing to invest the time and effort required to understand its comprehensive vision, would be able to appreciate its potential significance. In the tradition of the mystery schools of ancient Egypt, the Urantia Book seemed designed to separate the casual seeker from the dedicated student. Its length alone served as a barrier to superficial engagement, while its sophisticated theological and philosophical content demanded serious intellectual effort. Like the initiates who sought wisdom in the temples of Anubis, those who would truly understand the Urantia teachings had to demonstrate their commitment through sustained study and contemplation. The question that haunted both supporters and critics of the Urantia revelation was whether any single text could truly contain all the answers to human existence. The ancient Egyptians understood that truth was multifaceted, like the many aspects of their complex deities. They recognized that different approaches to understanding were necessary for different temperaments and circumstances. Could one book, regardless of its claimed divine origin, encompass the full spectrum of human spiritual need? The celestial beings who allegedly authored the Urantia papers seemed aware of this limitation. They repeatedly emphasized that their revelation was not intended to replace human experience and discovery, but to provide a framework within which such experience could be better understood. They spoke of truth as living and growing, not static and fixed. They encouraged readers to test their teachings against personal experience and continuing revelation. Yet, the scope of their claims remained breathtaking. They purported to explain the nature of God, the structure of the universe, the purpose of existence, the destiny of humanity, and the meaning of individual life. They offered detailed accounts of cosmic history, planetary evolution, and spiritual development that spanned billions of years and countless worlds. They presented a vision of reality so comprehensive that it seemed to leave no significant question unanswered. The disciples of Anubis, who understood the weight of souls and the complexity of divine judgment, would have recognized the profound challenge that the Urantia revelation presented to human consciousness. For here was a text that demanded not blind faith, but active engagement with concepts that stretched the very limits of mortal comprehension. The ancient god of the afterlife knew that truth, like the journey through the underworld, required guides who could navigate the treacherous passages between ignorance and enlightenment. Those who first encountered the completed Urantia book in the middle of the 20th century found themselves confronting a phenomenon that defied easy categorization. Unlike the sacred texts of established religions, which had emerged from recognizable historical contexts and developed through centuries of institutional interpretation, the Urantia papers appeared fully formed, claiming immediate divine authority, while offering no traditional credentials to support such claims. The very audacity of this presentation served as both its greatest strength and its most significant vulnerability. The text's treatment of science proved particularly intriguing to those who sought to evaluate its credibility. The celestial authors claimed that they were limited in what they could reveal about scientific matters, being forbidden to provide knowledge that humanity had not yet earned through its own discovery. Yet they made numerous statements about cosmology, geology, biology, and physics that either aligned with or anticipated scientific understanding. Some of these statements would later be validated by discoveries made decades after the book's publication, while others remained controversial or unverified. In the realm of astronomy, the Urantia book described a universe structure that differed significantly from the models accepted by mid-20th century science. It spoke of a central universe surrounded by 7 super-universes, each containing billions of galaxies in various stages of development. This cosmic architecture was presented not merely as a physical arrangement, but as a spiritual hierarchy in which each level of organization served specific purposes in the divine plan for creation. The book's account of Earth's geological history included references to continental drift at a time when this theory was still controversial among scientists. It described the breakup of a supercontinent and the subsequent movement of landmasses in terms that would later be validated by plate tectonic theory. Such prescient statements lent credibility to the text's claims of superhuman authorship. Yet they also raised questions about why some scientific information was provided, while other equally important knowledge was withheld. The biological sections of the Urantia Book presented an evolutionary framework that attempted to reconcile scientific understanding with spiritual purpose. The celestial authors described evolution not as a random process, but as a carefully guided development overseen by beings called life carriers. These entities were said to have implanted the original life patterns on Earth and to have periodically intervened to ensure that evolution proceeded according to divine plan. This guided evolution concept offered a middle path between purely materialistic and strictly creationist interpretations of life's development. It acknowledged the reality of evolutionary processes, while maintaining that they served spiritual purposes beyond mere survival and reproduction. The life carriers were described as having the ability to manipulate genetic patterns and to introduce new capabilities at appropriate stages of planetary development. The book's treatment of human evolution was particularly detailed, describing the development of consciousness, the emergence of moral reasoning, and the gradual awakening of spiritual awareness in early human populations. It spoke of specific genetic improvements introduced through the mating of superior human strains, and of the tragic consequences that followed when these improvement programs were disrupted by the planetary rebellion. According to the Urantia teachings, the normal pattern of human development on inhabited worlds included the arrival of material sons and daughters, beings of superior genetic endowment, who were intended to uplift the biological status of the native populations. On Earth, this mission was undertaken by Adam and Eve, but their premature default in their assigned task left humanity biologically handicapped compared to the populations of normal worlds. This biological handicap was said to manifest in various ways: shorter lifespans, greater susceptibility to disease, reduced intellectual capacity, and increased tendency toward antisocial behavior. The Urantia authors suggested that many of the problems that plagued human civilization could be traced to this genetic deficiency, which would only be gradually overcome through natural evolutionary processes and eventual spiritual transformation. The psychological insights contained in the Urantia Book demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of human nature that seemed to anticipate developments in psychology and neuroscience. The text described the mind as composed of multiple circuits and levels of function, each serving different purposes in the development of personality and consciousness. It spoke of the relationship between brain function and mental activity in ways that suggested knowledge of neurological processes that would not be fully understood until decades later. The concept of personality as distinct from both body and mind was central to the Urantia psychology. Personality was described as a unique gift from the Universal Father, an unchanging pattern that unified all aspects of individual existence while remaining separate from both material and mental phenomena. This personality was said to survive physical death and to serve as the foundation for continued existence in the afterlife realms. The book's description of the afterlife itself was remarkably detailed and systematic. Rather than the simple heaven and hell dichotomy of traditional Christianity or the complex bardos of Tibetan Buddhism, the Urantia teachings presented a vast educational system spanning multiple worlds and universes. Newly deceased humans were said to awaken on the first of 7 mansion worlds, where they would continue their spiritual and intellectual development under the guidance of celestial teachers. This progressive education system was designed to prepare ascending mortals for increasingly responsible roles in cosmic administration. The ultimate goal was not merely personal salvation or enlightenment, but active participation in the divine plan for universe development. Each individual was seen as having unique potential contributions to make to the cosmic community, and the entire educational process was designed to help them discover and develop these capabilities. The social and political implications of the Urantia teachings were profound, though often presented in subtle ways that required careful analysis to fully appreciate. The book's vision of cosmic government provided models for human social organization that transcended the limitations of existing political systems. It described administrative structures that balanced individual freedom with collective responsibility and decision-making processes that incorporated both wisdom and experience. The concept of universe citizenship was particularly significant in this regard. According to the Urantia teachings, every conscious being was ultimately a citizen of the grand universe, with rights and responsibilities that transcended planetary or even system boundaries. This cosmic perspective was intended to help humans develop a broader understanding of their place in creation and their obligations to fellow beings throughout the universe. The book's treatment of religion was both respectful and revolutionary. It acknowledged the valuable contributions that existing religions had made to human spiritual development, while pointing out their limitations and distortions. The celestial authors suggested that all genuine religious experience was based on the same fundamental relationship between the individual soul and the divine presence within, but that institutional interpretations had often obscured this essential truth. Rather than advocating for a new religion to replace existing ones, the Urantia book seemed designed to provide a framework that could enhance and purify religious understanding across all traditions. It spoke of the religion of Jesus as distinct from the religion about Jesus, emphasizing personal spiritual experience over doctrinal conformity or institutional authority. This approach to religion reflected the book's broader emphasis on individual spiritual growth and responsibility. While it provided detailed information about cosmic organization and divine purposes, it consistently emphasized that each person must develop their own relationship with God and make their own decisions about spiritual matters. The role of revelation was seen as providing information and inspiration, not as replacing personal experience and choice. The ethical teachings of the Urantia book were grounded in the concept of cosmic citizenship and the recognition of the divine presence within every individual. The Golden Rule was expanded to encompass not just human relationships, but interactions with all conscious beings throughout the universe. The development of cosmic consciousness was seen as naturally leading to more ethical behavior as individuals came to understand their fundamental interconnectedness with all creation. The book's approach to social problems was similarly comprehensive, addressing issues of economics, government, family life, and international relations from the perspective of cosmic principles. It suggested that many human problems stemmed from the spiritual immaturity of the species, and that lasting solutions would require not just better institutions, but transformed individuals who could create and maintain more enlightened social structures. The question of the book's ultimate authority remained central to any serious evaluation of its claims. Unlike traditional scriptures, which derived their authority from historical religious communities and institutional interpretation, the Urantia Book stood alone, claiming direct celestial authorship, while providing no external validation for this claim. Readers were left to evaluate its truth based on their own spiritual discernment and rational analysis. This situation created both opportunities and challenges for those who encountered the text. On one hand, it freed readers from the need to accept institutional interpretations or historical baggage that might obscure the essential message. On the other hand, it placed the full burden of evaluation on individual judgment, requiring a level of spiritual maturity and intellectual sophistication that not all readers possessed. The ancient initiates of the Egyptian mysteries would have understood this challenge well. They knew that the most profound truths could not be simply transmitted from teacher to student, but had to be discovered through personal experience and inner development. The Urantia Book seemed designed according to similar principles, providing information and inspiration while requiring readers to do the work of integration and application themselves. The text's treatment of Jesus represented perhaps its most controversial aspect, as it challenged both traditional Christian interpretations and secular historical scholarship. The celestial authors presented Jesus as the incarnation of Michael of Nebadon, the creator and sovereign of the local universe containing Earth. This cosmic Christ was said to have lived a fully human life while maintaining his divine nature and cosmic responsibilities. The detailed biography of Jesus contained in the 4th section of the book covered his entire life, from birth to resurrection, including many events not recorded in the biblical Gospels. This account portrayed Jesus as both more human and more divine than traditional Christian theology suggested, showing him experiencing genuine human emotions and struggles while demonstrating capabilities that reflected his cosmic status. The Urantia version of Jesus' teachings emphasized the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man as the central truths of his gospel. It suggested that much of later Christian theology had obscured these simple but profound concepts with complex doctrines about atonement, salvation, and divine wrath. The Jesus of the Urantia Book taught primarily about the love of God and the potential for spiritual growth inherent in every human being. This interpretation of Jesus' mission had significant implications for understanding the purpose of religion and the nature of spiritual development. Rather than focusing on sin and salvation, the Urantia Jesus emphasized growth and service. Rather than requiring specific beliefs or rituals, he taught that spiritual progress depended on sincere desire to know and do God's will. The wisdom of Anubis, keeper of the scales of truth, whispered through the corridors of time that the ultimate test of any revelation lay not in its claims of divine origin, but in its capacity to transform the souls who encountered it. The ancient god who weighed hearts against the feather of Ma'at understood that truth possessed an inherent power to elevate consciousness, regardless of the vessel through which it arrived. As the decades passed following the publication of the Urantia Book, this principle would be tested in the lives of countless individuals who grappled with its extraordinary claims and comprehensive teachings. The community that formed around the Urantia revelation developed in ways that both fulfilled and confounded the expectations of its early guardians. Unlike traditional religious movements, which typically organized around charismatic leaders or institutional structures, the Urantia movement remained deliberately decentralized and non-authoritarian. The foundation, established to publish and protect the text, specifically avoided creating a church or formal religious organization, instead encouraging the formation of study groups and informal associations of readers. This approach reflected the book's own emphasis on individual spiritual development and personal relationship with the divine. The celestial authors had repeatedly warned against the institutionalization of their teachings, pointing to the historical tendency of religious organizations to ossify revelation and substitute human authority for divine guidance. They encouraged readers to form communities of study and service, but cautioned against creating hierarchical structures that might limit spiritual freedom or suppress continuing revelation. The absence of formal religious structure created both strengths and challenges for the developing Urantia community. On the positive side, it prevented the kind of doctrinal disputes and power struggles that had plagued other religious movements. Readers were free to interpret the teachings according to their own understanding and to apply them in ways that suited their individual circumstances. The emphasis on study rather than worship created an atmosphere of intellectual inquiry that attracted thoughtful individuals from diverse backgrounds. However, this same lack of structure also made it difficult to maintain unity of understanding or to provide consistent guidance for new readers. Without authoritative interpretation, the community sometimes fragmented into competing schools of thought, each claiming to represent the true understanding of the revelation. The very comprehensiveness that made the Urantia Book so appealing also made it susceptible to selective interpretation and partial understanding. The question of whether the Urantia Book truly contained all the answers became more complex as readers attempted to apply its teachings to the practical challenges of daily life. While the text provided extensive information about cosmic organization, spiritual development, and divine purposes, it offered less specific guidance about many contemporary issues. Readers found themselves needing to extrapolate principles from the general teachings and apply them to situations that the celestial authors had not directly addressed. This process of application revealed both the strengths and limitations of the Urantia approach to revelation. The book's emphasis on principles rather than rules encouraged creative thinking and personal responsibility, but it also left room for disagreement about how those principles should be implemented. Different readers could arrive at conflicting conclusions while claiming to base their positions on the same revealed teachings. The scientific claims of the Urantia book continued to generate controversy as human knowledge advanced. Some of the book's statements about cosmology, geology, and biology were validated by subsequent discoveries, lending credibility to its claims of superhuman authorship. The description of continental drift, the account of planetary formation, and certain aspects of evolutionary theory proved remarkably prescient for a text published in the 1950s. However, other scientific statements in the book remained controversial or were apparently contradicted by later discoveries. The account of human evolution included details that did not align with paleontological evidence, and the cosmological model described in the text differed significantly from the expanding universe theory that became accepted scientific orthodoxy. These discrepancies raised questions about the nature of the revelation and the extent to which it was intended to provide scientific information. The celestial authors had acknowledged that they were limited in what they could reveal about scientific matters, being forbidden to provide unearned knowledge that would short-circuit human discovery. They also stated that some of their scientific information was presented in terms that would be understandable to early 20th century readers, even if those terms would later prove inadequate or incorrect. This explanation satisfied some readers, but left others questioning whether any of the book's scientific claims could be trusted. The psychological and spiritual insights of the Urantia book proved more enduring than its scientific statements. The text's understanding of personality development, the nature of consciousness, and the dynamics of spiritual growth resonated with many readers' personal experience and seemed to anticipate developments in psychology and neuroscience. The concept of the thought adjuster as an indwelling divine presence provided a framework for understanding mystical experience that many found both intellectually satisfying and spiritually inspiring. The book's approach to mental health and emotional well-being emphasized the importance of spiritual perspective in achieving psychological balance. It suggested that many mental and emotional problems stemmed from spiritual maladjustment and could be alleviated through the development of cosmic consciousness and divine relationship. While this approach was sometimes criticized as oversimplifying complex psychological issues, many readers reported significant personal benefits from applying these principles to their own lives. The social and political implications of the Urantia teachings became more apparent as readers attempted to apply cosmic principles to earthly institutions. The book's vision of enlightened government, based on wisdom rather than power, and dedicated to the welfare of all citizens, provided an ideal that inspired some readers to become involved in political reform efforts. However, the text's emphasis on gradual evolution rather than revolutionary change sometimes frustrated those who sought immediate solutions to social problems. The economic teachings of the Urantia book were particularly challenging to implement in practice. The celestial authors described economic systems on advanced worlds that had eliminated poverty and inequality through the application of spiritual principles and advanced technology. They suggested that Earth's economic problems stemmed largely from the spiritual immaturity of its inhabitants and would be resolved as humanity developed greater cosmic consciousness. This long-term perspective offered hope for ultimate solutions to economic injustice, but provided little immediate guidance for addressing current inequalities. Some readers interpreted the teachings as supporting various forms of socialism or communalism, while others saw them as endorsing enlightened capitalism or entirely new economic models. The lack of specific prescriptions in the text left room for widely divergent interpretations of its economic implications. The international relations described in the Urantia Book painted a picture of eventual planetary unity under enlightened world government. The celestial authors suggested that nationalism and sovereignty were temporary phases in human political evolution that would eventually give way to global citizenship and cosmic perspective. They described the process by which advanced worlds achieved planetary unity and suggested that Earth would eventually follow a similar path. This vision of world government was both inspiring and troubling to different readers. Some saw it as the natural culmination of human social evolution and worked to promote international cooperation and global consciousness. Others worried about the potential for tyranny in world government and emphasized the importance of preserving individual freedom and cultural diversity. The book's teachings about the balance between unity and diversity provided some guidance for resolving these tensions, but left many practical questions unanswered. The educational implications of the Urantia revelation were profound, as the text presented a model of learning that extended far beyond traditional academic subjects. The Mansion World schools described in the book emphasized experiential learning, character development, and service to others as essential components of true education. This holistic approach to learning influenced some readers to become involved in educational reform efforts or to develop alternative educational models. The book's emphasis on the integration of science, philosophy, and religion as essential for complete understanding challenged the compartmentalization that characterized much of modern education. The celestial authors suggested that the separation of these domains of knowledge had contributed to the spiritual confusion and intellectual fragmentation that plagued human civilization. They advocated for educational approaches that would help students develop unified worldviews based on both rational understanding and spiritual insight. The artistic and cultural implications of the Urantia teachings were less explicitly developed in the text, but proved significant for many readers. The book's vision of beauty as a fundamental aspect of divine reality inspired some to pursue artistic expression as a form of spiritual service. The description of advanced civilizations that had achieved remarkable integration of truth, beauty, and goodness provided models for cultural development that transcended the limitations of contemporary society. The question of continuing revelation remained central to understanding the Urantia Book's place in human spiritual development. The celestial authors repeatedly emphasized that their revelation was not final or complete, but was intended to prepare humanity for even greater revelations to come. They encouraged readers to remain open to new truth from whatever source it might emerge, and warned against the tendency to crystallize their teachings into rigid dogma. This openness to continuing revelation created both opportunities and challenges for the Urantia community. It prevented the kind of fundamentalist interpretation that had characterized some religious movements, but it also made it difficult to maintain doctrinal coherence or to distinguish between genuine spiritual insight and personal opinion. Some readers claimed to receive continuing revelations that supplemented or corrected the Urantia teachings, while others insisted that the book itself was sufficient for current human needs. The ultimate question of whether the Urantia book truly contained all the answers could not be definitively resolved through intellectual analysis alone. Like the ancient mysteries of Egypt, the truth of the revelation could only be tested through personal experience and spiritual application. Those who approached the text as serious students and attempted to live according to its teachings often reported profound transformations in their understanding and experience of reality. The book's comprehensive vision of cosmic reality provided a framework within which many readers found meaning and purpose that had been lacking in their previous worldviews. The integration of scientific, philosophical, and religious perspectives offered a unified understanding that satisfied both intellectual and spiritual needs. The emphasis on personal spiritual growth and service to others provided practical guidance for daily living that many found both challenging and rewarding. Yet even the most devoted students of the Urantia revelation recognized that the book's answers, however comprehensive, were ultimately provisional and incomplete. The celestial authors themselves acknowledged the limitations of language and concept in conveying infinite truth to finite minds. They emphasized that their teachings were intended to stimulate spiritual growth and cosmic consciousness, not to provide final answers to all possible questions. The ancient wisdom of Anubis recognized that truth was not a possession to be grasped, but a living reality to be experienced and embodied. The God who weighed souls understood that the ultimate test of any teaching lay not in its claims to authority, but in its capacity to transform those who encountered it. By this standard, the Urantia book had proven its worth in the lives of countless individuals who had found in its pages not just answers to their questions, but inspiration for their spiritual journey toward the infinite source of all truth and reality. The question of whether any single text could contain all the answers to human existence remained as mysterious as the circumstances of the Urantia revelation itself. Perhaps the true answer lay not in the completeness of any particular teaching, but in the eternal quest for truth that drove human consciousness ever upward toward its divine source. In this quest, the Urantia book stood as both guide and companion, offering not final answers, but better questions, not ultimate truth, but clearer vision of the infinite reality that beckoned beyond all finite understanding.